Welcome to This Week in Health IT Influence, where we discuss the influence of technology on health with people who are making it happen. My name is Bill Russell. We're covering healthcare CIO and creator of This Week in Health IT, a set of podcasts and videos dedicated to developing the next generation of health IT leaders. This podcast is brought to you by Health Lyrics. Have a struggling healthcare project you need to go well? Let's talk. Visit healthlyrics.com to schedule your free consultation. So a couple of you asked how you can support the show. So if you want to support one of the fastest growing podcasts in the health IT space, here are 5 easy ways you can do it. Share it with a peer, follow our social accounts, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, interact or repost any of our social media content. Send me feedback questions. I've got about 4 or 5 emails this week with suggestions. I really appreciate those. So send me feedback, questions, guest recommendations at bill@thisweekinhealthit.com. or subscribe to our newsletter on the website. All right, let's get to it. So today we're joined by Eric Yablonka, CIO of Stanford Healthcare and former CIO of University of Chicago Medicine. Good morning, Eric, and thanks for coming on the show.
Good morning, Bill. Thanks for having me.
You know, and I have to apologize. A couple episodes back, I mispronounced your name as Eric Yablonsky because my next door neighbor across the street has that last name. So let's just start with an apology right up front.
It's never happened before, but it's okay. Thank you.
Everybody always gets your name right. Well, that's so. How long have you been? How long have you been at Stanford?
It's been a little over a year and a half, and a big change. I was at University of Chicago for 16 years, and both institutions are unbelievably great organizations. So I've just been very lucky.
Yeah, so many great things about both those institutions, but Stanford, you have amazing, really smart people, so many innovative minds, proximity to Silicon Valley. I mean, what would you highlight as sort of maybe the most interesting thing about working in that ecosystem that is that area and that university?
Well, it is a very unique environment in that respect. It shares almost all the aspects of other academic medical centers, but the fact that it is located in Silicon Valley and it is, as an organization, has a history of intellectual property development and advances primarily in technology makes it a very rich environment to work in.
So are people knocking on your door perpetually saying, hey, I've got this really cool idea, can you help me?
That would be one way to put it. They come from every direction. I mean, just a very quick vignette. I had a student who was, I think he was a junior, happened to be on an athletic scholarship. He sent me an email, introduced himself. He said, I really am interested in a career in healthcare IT. Can I come and speak to you? And I was like, absolutely. I'm happy to meet with students. So he came to see me and he was wearing his athletic gear and seemed like a super smart guy, and essentially he came and pitched me a company. And so that was sort of one of my introductions to the Stanford environment is, lots of people with lots of really good ideas. Everybody's very, very bright, very motivated, and really believe that technology can have an influence in both healthcare and in academics.
Yeah, that's exciting. So we met at the Scottsdale Institute meeting earlier this year. And since you're the last person from that group to come on the show, because you've had a pretty busy schedule, I'm going to give you the topic that nobody else really wanted to discuss. But I think it fits pretty well with where you're at, and that is, how do you prepare for the innovation conversations? How do you prepare health IT for all those things? We have this whole idea of tech debt is now sort of entering our conversation in health IT. And we had a brief conversation at the Scottsdale Institute how important architecture is in order to enable innovation, to be able to respond to those kind of things. So you get the really sexy topic of health IT architecture. So looking forward to that. Are you excited about the topic?
I'm up for it. Let's go, Bill.
Everybody wants to talk about innovation. Everybody wants to talk about things, but the next couple of weeks, I'm going to have architecture and security. So I find every time I talk about security, the number of listeners goes down by about 10 to 15% because no one wants to talk about security. So we'll see what happens. So let's talk about architecture and tech debt and those kind of things. So one of the things that struck me is you were actually going out and looking for hiring an architect to put in place What's the need for architecture within health IT, and why do you see that role as important?
Sure. I think it's a good question because as a vertical, I think historically we've thought that having our core systems, whether it be electronic medical records or ERP systems or those kinds of major systems was enough. And whatever wrapped around that, whether it was your Citrix infrastructure or your data and storage, all that stuff was pretty straightforward because you were serving these major applications. And of course, we all know we run hundreds and hundreds of other applications, but that was really the focus. And in those days, maybe you had a lab system as well. In those days, perhaps things were a little more simple, perhaps. But as we've learned from all other industries, is that really it's an ecosystem of applications that drives value. And for healthcare organizations, there just has not been the uptake on thinking through how to purposefully create architectures and ecosystems that advance the organization. It doesn't mean others don't have architects. I think a lot of people do, but it's in healthcare in general, it's not been a prevalent discipline. And particularly for smaller organizations, perhaps there really isn't even a need if you're a smaller, mid-sized healthcare delivery system. But for us, at a major academic medical center with many partners, clinical and academic partners in the ecosystem, our ability to interoperate with them is even more critical. And as we do things like open up our new building, which is a $2 billion facility that will have the latest and greatest of technology, we are dealing with things like the Internet of Things. We are looking at serving people when they're at home or off campus. We have employer-based clinics. We have over 70 locations in the Bay Area, and we have partnerships with other healthcare organizations. And even just on campus, when we want to interoperate for medical research or to support other initiatives in the School of Medicine, our ability to serve data up or to lower the friction, if you will, in working together is critically important. So our thoughts there are to really purposefully architect solutions that will enable those kinds of capabilities. And in doing so, also deal with the other topics that we're supposedly not going to talk about today, which are how do we innovate? How do we get more agile? How do we manage risk, whether it's security or other kinds of risks? But really, how do we enable the interoperability that is necessary in healthcare for 2025, not to continue computing in the 2015 model that we're in.
It's intelligent design around the system, and I think when I talk to people outside of healthcare and I say, our modest health system had 800 applications, they just sort of step back and go, 800 applications? Are you kidding? But that's the norm, if not the average. And we were about a $7 billion health system, and that's the norm. And I've talked to other CIOs who are like, hey, we have far more than that. So I had a conversation with the CIO this week, and I think it talks to this whole architecture conversation. Because he was asking me about cloud, and we were talking about cloud and where it fits and how it would fit into his overall strategy. And it was interesting because he said, well, how many other health systems are doing this? And I said, to be honest with you, so many health systems have so much tech debt. We've done so many projects so quickly that they're just trying to clean things up, that some of them are really struggling to do the new things, to do the really exciting things, because there's just so much cleanup. How do you stay ahead of that? How do you stay ahead of, because you probably have 50 projects going on right now. How do you stay ahead of the tech that's just natural, that just comes as a result of doing those projects?
Sure. Well, I think tech debt's hard to avoid. I think we're all making investments, and we know that those are not short-term investments, so we're likely to outlive the technology life cycle for any one of those and have to continue to stay with it. So one of the roles of someone who focuses on architecture is really around that question of how do we drive value or optimize our cost position as it relates to our either infrastructure or applications. So we will go through the usual stuff. We will do an applications rationalization. We'll look for duplication and overlap and see if we can wring out some costs and tech debt that way. We'll also really look at any kind of simplification of our technology so that the complexity gets, to the extent that it can get pulled out as well. Hopefully, again, moderating costs or allowing us to take those dollars and reinvest it into some other kind of technology. There'll be a lot of focus on that. I mean, one of the things we're also doing at Stanford is we're planning the unification of the School of Medicine IT group with the Stanford Healthcare IT group. And that's a good example of where two organizations have done amazing work. They've served their constituencies very well, but some of the tech has grown up, if you will, side by side. And really, we all know healthcare is a team sport, particularly in academic medicine, where we also have research and teaching happening as well as patient care. And so our ability to then rationalize that technology now with the School of Medicine is a very exciting opportunity. And in fact, I think our faculty are very excited to know that we might be able to actually ease the burden on them with the tech debt that's out there and make it easier to work with and easier to do business with. And so that architectural discipline will be really positive if we can drive some improvements in not only our cost position, but how easy it is to work in an organization such as ours.
Have you been able to hire that architect, or are you still in the process of trying to?
We're in recruitment mode, and it's really very interesting. I have a bias for someone outside of healthcare who has maybe some commercial grade type of experience. It's just a bias. But we've seen candidates who are more corporate, and we've also seen people who are from healthcare but have some very advanced experience. So I would say it's a great field. But to maybe some of your earlier comments, Bill, I'm recruiting against Silicon Valley companies, and the interesting thing there, going back to Stanford and the brand, is that we actually have people who may think that it's a great opportunity to come to an organization like Stanford and have a big influence in the healthcare industry and do meaningful mission-oriented work versus, the quarterly Wall Street report and obviously the relentless drive for profitability. Now, doesn't mean, as we know, all healthcare organizations are not trying to make money, but we also know that money goes right back to the organization and gets invested for patient care and other things versus return to shareholders. So we do have people who seem to resonate with that idea, and I think that's actually quite exciting to think we could bring these things together, the commercial grade capabilities with the healthcare vertical, and see if we can accelerate the transformation of care at Stanford.
Yeah, so architecture, architecture is interesting because you can apply it to infrastructure. You could also apply it to data. And, so we've seen a lot of federal initiatives around data. They're coming in and saying, hey, do FHIR, do APIs. They've given us models. You have TEFCA. You have just other models around. I think looking at it, saying, "Hey, every other industry has figured out how to share their data and share it effectively," and then they sort of grab at this thing and say, "Well, it's APIs." Now, APIs are important in architecture, but it's not the end all and be all. I guess my question here would be, from a data standpoint, how do we step back, because we don't own all the silos within healthcare, right? So people say, well, why can't you share data? And we say, well, it's 800 applications and it's not all in a central place. And when we do bring it into a central place, because eventually we started with EDWs and we're moving to more sophisticated models, but even still, when we bring all that data together, it doesn't mesh real well. And then people were like, well, just share it with the patient. But this is where architecture really comes into play. What kind of what are you thinking in terms of being able to make that data available, to patients, to innovators, to researchers? How are you going to make it easier for them to access it, but still maintain? This is what architecture is about: maintaining the security, maintaining the controls, and maintaining the quality of the data in the product.
That's a very good question. So obviously, there's a lot of work to be done around the data and architecting that data such that you enable its use. And that will be a big focus for the person that comes to Stanford. He or she will definitely be working a lot on the analytics side. And of course, it's not just about how do you persist that data, as you mentioned, store it or persist that data. It's really more how do you use it in new and novel ways and drive organizational performance. So, great examples are real-time and predictive analytics. Probably one of the big opportunities to drive organizational performance and to eliminate waste, improve asset utilization and patient experience. And so, we'll be working on those kinds of things. But to your point, to actually do those kinds of things, you have to enable or get the data to the point where that you can use that to enable these kinds of applications. And that's a journey. That's not, I do a project, my data is all good, and all I have to do is just, fire up a couple APIs and I'm ready to go. That's going to be a journey, and we're going to be working on that for a very long time. And I would say that's, if you really look at IT strategy, if we're also developing an IT strategic plan, data and analytics and the use of that data is absolutely top 2 initiatives. And so, I think the old days of, let's stuff it all in the warehouse, then let's build some dashboards, and oh, by the way, let's extract that, we'll send it over to the School of Medicine so they can do their research. Those are all fine things to do, but we end up persisting data multiple times. We don't really have a good handle on our data governance in terms of the lineage of the data and how it's actually being used. And we actually, because of these setups, we can't really leverage it the way we want to. Now, that doesn't contemplate the other areas that you've talked about, controls like security or privacy controls and making sure those are appropriate. But taking a purposeful view in architecture allows us to actually engineer those solutions and perhaps be a little less ad hoc about it. Regardless, those controls have to be in place.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a simple architecture diagram, and how powerful that ends up being when you're talking to different vendors and you're like, this is where you fit, and these are the things you have to supply. But let's talk about governance. So you brought up the word governance. I didn't bring it up. You brought it up. And the interesting thing I found about governance is the number of people that are able to recommend a new application in a health system, let alone an academic medical system, is pretty significant. And so people are constantly bringing new applications to bear with, for some really cool outcomes and really cool features and those kind of things. And it's easy to get really caught up in that. But what do you do? Do you have a process for vetting those applications based on their ability to share data, their ability to function well within your architecture, and their ability to be a part of maybe a complete health platform for Stanford? Do you have a process, and how do you ensure that everything sort of fits together?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Bill. And I think you were starting to describe the ideal state, which might be a great target for us, but we're not quite there yet. And I would think others are still on the journey as well. So we do have an architectural review board today. They look at all new applications for things like interoperability, security, making sure that it can fit into our infrastructure, that kind of thing. But that's sort of more catching versus pitching, and you described a little bit more pitching, like here's our reference architecture, here's where we want to be, and here's how you fit in a very specific way. And oh, by the way, if you don't meet X, Y, and Z criteria, then you don't fit in at all. And I think we're going to be getting more towards that than where we are today, which is trying to make sure we understand when applications are selected, that they, or as they're being selected, we do that analysis and make sure we understand that position. We're no different than anybody else. Every single C-suite member, physician leader, or physician is either being pitched, being contacted day after day after day, and a lot of really good ideas out there. Analytics is a great example where a lot of fantastic point solutions. But if you bought 10 or 15 point solutions, and then you think about how do you manage data across those and do your reporting across those point solutions, it feels like things could get out of control very quickly, or you could have a lot of inconsistencies in your data. So really having a position on both your architecture, your infrastructure, your interoperability, with a set of standards such that, as you look at plugging things in, it's very clear where they stand, would be a great advantage. And that's what we're working on.
Yeah. I'm going to take this in a little different direction, but it's interesting because we had conversations with a company called IASD, and I think IASD's up near you guys, and their whole concept is data has shape. They bring in all the data, they map it, and it has a shape, and the shape tells you certain aspects about your workflow, your process, and those kind of things. What I found in all these projects, all these machine learning and AI projects and mapping projects, is you can't feed them enough data. They want more. They want more and more and more data, and at some point, it's you end up with data sprawl. I mean, it's hard to track all the places that you've sent data. Are you finding that's becoming more and more of a challenge, especially where you're at? I imagine the number of AI and machine learning projects you're getting hit with are probably pretty significant, and they probably want as much data as you can give them.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point as well. In that, at least at Stanford, we have some of the best AI people in the country. Our radiology people are amazing, and we have other faculty members, some of which will be working directly with inside of IT, are just industry leaders. And it is true that, for machine learning models and other data science applications, it's all about large data stores. And that's why more and more you're seeing multi-center trials or collaborations. Certainly on oncology research and other areas, I mean, the government expects us to partner with others as well as do our own research. So another reason why we're going where we're going is to really enable that kind of work. We do provide data to the School of Medicine appropriately and within our privacy policies, but often that's not enough, and they do partner with other schools to see if they can put those data sets to run the models. And of course, that's not a one-time thing either. You actually have to have a continuous capability for AI and ML. You have to have a continuous capability because that's how these things learn. And so we're going to be putting together an approach to that. We're a little ways away from that, but we have to put an approach together because that will be a high area of focus at Stanford Medicine over the next couple of years.
All right, so we'll take the last couple minutes and talk about innovation. So I won't just pigeonhole you into this architecture. So you have a lot of innovative partners in that area. Let's start with this question. Let's put you on the spot and say, you're going to leave Stanford. You're going to do a health startup. Where do you see sort of a current underserved area that you might be able to incubate something new, or if somebody uses your idea, we'll give you credit in the future. But I'm just curious if there's an area you wish there was more innovation talk, or you see an opportunity.
Well, I for some reason I'm pretty close to the security space. I've met a lot of people, particularly Israeli companies, that have come out with amazing IP around the security space. That's very interesting to me. Plus, quite frankly, very big challenges to solve for. So whether it's automating threat detection and response, or some of the analytics around that, I would find that to be a pretty juicy topic to work on. I think analytics is another area, but really from an enterprise play, we've seen big entrants in the market, some with modest success. Uh, there's got to be a better way to think about that. And while everybody, again, has niche solutions, I just wonder if there's a better enterprise play. And that's not, the data warehouse project, if you will, but really thinking about how do we stream data, how do we deal with the Internet of Things, and how do we enable that data to drive organizational performance in the moment or as it's coming versus what happened last week, last month. I think those are all really good topics, and there's investors around all of it today. So I'm sure we'll see lots of advances.
So what do you tell the student who walks into your office and says, I've got this great idea, I need to work with the health system? Because a lot of them don't recognize the complexity of working with the health system. One of the things I always tell people is, be aware of the sales cycle within healthcare. That alone can kill a great idea and a great startup. What are the things that you would tell a young entrepreneur who's going to rely on doing business with health systems?
Well, yeah, I've been on the board of a startup company, and it's very interesting when you see it on the inside as a CIO, when you see the inside of sales cycles and forecasting a business and then actually what happens on the ground. So for the young student, I would say, definitely be patient and persistent to the extent that, understand that there are long sales cycles, that decision making isn't always clear from the buyer perspective, but also prove value. You have to be able to prove value and differentiate yourself from the 20 other people who have contacted the people you're talking to, this week. And I think that's a big challenge. How do you really get through the clutter of all the opportunities in healthcare? But for some organizations, it just takes a couple of dots on the map, and all of a sudden you have some traction and you can take off, or you can attract further investment to allow you to scale. And so it'll be a different world in 5 or 10 years in healthcare, and I think there'll be lots of opportunity for entrepreneurs and investors. But they have to have something super special. Things in healthcare tend to go a little slow. At Stanford, we talk about being value focused, digitally driven, and uniquely Stanford. Those 3 areas are what we're aiming to. And in that context, just even for our own employees, over time, we'd like to put the process together where people who have good ideas can come to us and we can process those in a quick way and either reinforce them and go forward with them, or ask them to think it through some more. And so we're doing that not only for our internal capability, trying to take away all the friction of how do you bring an idea to fruition, but we're also doing that so we can line up with outside organizations and be easier to work with. Stanford's a big place, and there's lots of touch points in these kinds of engagements, and we want to make sure that it's understandable and we're efficient about it, because there's going to be a lot of work in that area.
Have you guys stood up? I know that like Cedars has an accelerator, and Providence has sort of a VC, not a sort of, but they have like a VC arm, and then others have set up these different innovation models. Are you just more ad hoc because you have so much innovation around you, or do you guys have something formal in place?
No, I think yes and yes, but I think now we're moving to sort of 2.0, generation 2.0 of some of that. We're building an incubator. We've established an industry relations group that will really help us. We work with Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft. I mean, we're working with a lot of big companies. And, if they feel that we're difficult to work with only because of our bureaucracy or our process, they can work with other people as well. So we're really purposeful. We're doing purposeful work on trying to smooth that out and make it a good experience, not only for our people internally and give them guidance on how to work together, but also for third parties who want to engage with us.
Do you think any of the direct, this is the last question, by the way, I want to respect your time here. We're almost at the 30-minute mark. So do you think any of these direct to patient, direct to consumer models are going to work? We see more and more of these health centers of excellence. We see telehealth plays, and Walmart's doing a play now. CVS is doing a play now. Do you think any of these they're not really end arounds because they're using care providers, but they're starting to hire care providers outside of the traditional hospital and standing those up. Are you concerned about any of those, or are any of those going to potentially make it harder to orchestrate that entire patient experience?
Yeah, well, yes, of course. And every market is different. And, there's no doubt the retail side of healthcare delivery, whether it's Walmart or CVS, is going to have an impact. Otherwise, they wouldn't be investing the kinds of monies that they plan to invest and are investing. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. It's hard for me to forecast what that will mean, but obviously for the healthcare provider, the hospitals and the large physician groups and physician networks, that's something to keep a keen eye on. And then I think for the consumer, that might actually be a really good thing.
Yeah.
It really depends. I can tell you, for some that won't work at all. They need a higher touch or a more comprehensive view. But for others, that might be just what the doctor ordered, if I can be so cute. I think it's really, it's happened in other industries, and healthcare is no different. More and more, the cost side of healthcare will come under greater scrutiny than it already has, and there's got to be better solutions for it. So whether we work on it within our healthcare system, which we will, or patients choose alternative providers, which some will, it'll be a very interesting ecosystem then. And of course, ultimately, to your point, how do we tie it all together so the continuity of care is addressed will be very, very interesting. And another reason why to get an architect together and really think about ecosystems and interoperability.
Well, nothing makes us talk about healthcare costs more than an election cycle, and we're heading there. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of talk about the cost of healthcare. Eric, thanks for taking the time. A great conversation. Anything you want to leave our listeners with?
No, I would just say, we're all of us who work in healthcare IT are just so privileged to serve our patients. It's really meaningful work, and now is the time for us to really help set the agenda for healthcare IT. There's so much capability and so much opportunity. I know my colleagues and I are really excited about being in the space. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'm excited that you're in the place you're at. So that's all for this week. Please come back every Friday for more great interviews with influencers. And don't forget, every Tuesday, we look at the news which is impacting health IT. This show is a production of This Week in Health IT. For more great content, you can check out our website, new URL, www.thisweekhealth.com, or the YouTube channel at thisweekhealth.com/video. Thanks for listening. That's all for now. Stop that recording. I record on